Under the vaulted ceiling of Kuala Lumpur's convention centre, cameras panned across rows of defence ministers seated behind their national flags. At the centre of attention was U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, calm, focused and deliberate. His voice carried through the hall, measured yet firm, as he addressed the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting. China's provocative actions also demonstrate a lack of respect for your countries, he said, looking directly towards several Southeast Asian representatives. By challenging and threatening your country's territorial sovereignty, it was a warning, but also an appeal. Hegseth's words framed the growing tension across the South China Sea, a region that has long served as both a maritime lifeline and a geopolitical fault line. The American defense chief's tone was sharp, underscoring Washington's concern that Beijing's moves, from island building to expanded military patrols, are not merely regional posturing, but part of a broader strategic assertion. China's sweeping territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea, Hegseth continued, are inconsistent with its commitments to resolve disputes peacefully. The audience listened closely. Defense officials from the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia and Indonesia, each of whom has in recent years faced pressure over Chinese vessels entering contested waters. For them, the message was familiar, but the phrasing was unusually direct. Hegseth, a veteran and a plain speaker, chose to make this point at a time when many regional capitals were balancing their ties between Washington and Beijing. He paused briefly, allowing the words to settle before shifting tone. But I also want to say that I welcome dialogue with China, he said, softening his cadence. Of course, our two presidents, President Trump and Chairman Xi, and I and Dong Jun, had an opportunity to talk. We greatly appreciate that. We are committed to dialogue and will continue to do so. That acknowledgement, naming China's Defense Minister Dong Jun and signalling openness, was critical. It indicated that Washington's posture, though firm, was not closed. The United States, Hegseth implied, was ready to compete, but also to communicate. It was a subtle but important signal to ASEAN states wary of choosing sides. The room remained still. Diplomats took notes. Reporters, seated at the back, began sending live updates. Outside the hall, banners bearing the ASEAN emblem fluttered in the warm Malaysian breeze as motorcades waited for the next bilateral session. The context of Hegseth's remarks was crucial. The South China Sea, through which an estimated $3 trillion in global trade passes annually, has been at the center of overlapping territorial claims. China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei and Indonesia all lay partial claim to the resource-rich waters. Beijing's 9-line, a sweeping claim extending deep into the maritime zones of its neighbours, has been repeatedly challenged by international law, most notably in 2016, when a Hague tribunal ruled in favour of the Philippines. China rejected that ruling outright. For the U.S., defending freedom of navigation and the international order in these waters is a stated priority. Under Hegseth's direction, the Pentagon has expanded its joint patrols with the Philippines, resumed security talks with Vietnam, and stepped up military cooperation with Indonesia and Malaysia. The message is one of reassurance that Washington stands ready to deter aggression and support partners under pressure. Yet even as he spoke in Kuala Lumpur, Hegseth was careful not to frame his remarks as a declaration of confrontation. Instead, he positioned them within the language of defense and diplomacy, a balancing act familiar to American policymakers operating in Asia. We seek a region that is free and open, he said in an earlier bilateral meeting, where no country dictates the path of another. That sentiment resonated strongly with several ASEAN leaders who have grown wary of escalating rivalry between the world's two largest powers. Many nations in the bloc, from Cambodia and Laos to Singapore and Thailand, have publicly emphasized their preference for strategic neutrality. They want economic ties with China, security ties with the United States, and stability above all. Hegseth's presence in Kuala Lumpur was therefore as much about reassurance as it was about signalling. The U.S. Secretary of Defense was not merely issuing a warning, he was reaffirming a commitment to uphold international law, to maintain open sea lanes, and to encourage diplomacy. His comments followed weeks of heightened tensions after reports that Chinese Coast Guard vessels had harassed Philippine supply boats in the second Thomas Shoal area. As footage of those confrontations circulated globally, pressure mounted on ASEAN to present a united front. The challenge, however, has always been cohesion. The 10-member bloc, with its diverse political systems and economic interests, often struggles to issue joint statements on sensitive security matters. Hegseth's remarks sought to bridge that gap, urging collaboration while also reminding members that silence in the face of coercion carries its own risks. Beyond the diplomatic flaw, analysts interpreted the speech as a deliberate blend of deterrence and diplomacy. The Pentagon, sources say, views Southeast Asia as a critical testing ground for how the broader Indo-Pacific order will evolve. If ASEAN nations can maintain sovereignty while engaging both superpowers, it could serve as a model for balance in an increasingly polarized world. In Washington, the Biden administration has faced internal debates about tone, how to remain assertive toward China without pushing regional partners into discomfort. Hegseth's language, respectful but firm, critical yet open, appeared to reflect that calibration. We are committed to dialogue and will continue to do so, he reiterated, underscoring that even amid disputes, communication remains essential. Observers in the hall noted how Hegseth's statement about President Trump and Chairman Xi caught attention. The mention of ongoing leader-to-leader dialogue suggested that the defense message was being coordinated at the highest level, signaling unity between political and military wings in Washington. For ASEAN ministers accustomed to shifts in U.S. tone between administrations, that continuity was significant. Throughout the meeting, the underlying question loomed: how far would Southeast Asia go in pushing back against China's maritime claims? The Philippines, emboldened by U.S. backing, has taken a harder line, while others like Malaysia and Indonesia have preferred quiet diplomacy. Vietnam, meanwhile, continues to modernize its navy, balancing between Beijing and Washington. As Hegseth departed the hall for a brief press interaction, he struck a careful note. Our partnerships are not about confrontation, he said. They're about cooperation and respect for sovereignty. His aides guided him toward a cluster of microphones where journalists pressed for clarification. Does the U.S. plan to expand its presence in the region? One asked. Hegseth smiled slightly, avoiding specifics. We'll continue to support our friends, he said, and uphold peace and stability in every way we can. The phrasing was diplomatic, but the undertone was clear. The U.S. sees itself as both protector and partner, a stabilizing force in a region increasingly defined by uncertainty. Meanwhile, Beijing has framed such comments as interference. Chinese state media, responding to earlier versions of Hegseth's remarks, accused Washington of fanning regional division and militarizing maritime disputes. For Chinese officials, the American narrative of freedom of navigation is viewed as cover for power projection. Still, even as tensions persist, both sides have acknowledged the need to keep communication channels open. Recent defense hotlines between Washington and Beijing have been reactivated, allowing direct military-to-military contact to prevent miscalculations. Hegseth's explicit reference to conversations with Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun highlighted that progress. We greatly appreciate that, he said, and we are committed to dialogue. In the broader context of ASEAN diplomacy, such lines matter. For smaller nations navigating between giants, the ability of the US and China to keep talking, even amid deep differences, can make the difference between calm seas and crisis. The day's session ended with a customary photo of ministers standing side by side, hands crossed in front, a symbol of ASEAN unity. Behind the smiles, however, lay the hard reality of strategic competition. Each minister knew that the stability of their region would depend on how the balance between deterrence and diplomacy played out in the months ahead. As Hegseth's convoy left the convention centre, the sun dipped low over Kuala Lumpur's skyline. Journalists filed their reports, quoting the U.S. Defense Secretary's warning about China's sweeping territorial claims and his simultaneous commitment to dialogue. The duality of those statements captured the essence of the day: firmness without hostility, vigilance tempered by diplomacy. In the corridors of regional power, that message will resonate. America is not retreating, China is not yielding, and Southeast Asia, as always, remains the arena where both seek to shape the tides of the future.